Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's hearing. Today we're going to hear from another witness who was part of Ryden's team handling the refurbishment. So, Mr. Millett?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, good morning. Today we're going to call Mr. Stephen Blake.
Yes, thank you very much. Would you ask Mr. Blake to come in, please?
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you very much, Mr. Blake. Now sit down, make yourself comfortable. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Millett?
Good morning, Mr. Blake. Could we start, please, by your giving the Chairman your full name?
Stephen William Blake.
Thank you. Now, thank you very much, first of all, for attending today to give evidence. We very much appreciate your doing so. I'm going to be asking you a number of questions. If you have any difficulty understanding any of them, please just say, and I can ask the question again, or I can put it in a different way. Also, if I can ask you, please, to keep your voice up so that the transcriber who sits to your right can hear you and get down your evidence. Also, just to mention one thing, a nod or a shake of the head doesn't go down on the transcript, so you do have to say yes or no, as the case may be. And if you need a break at any point, other than the scheduled breaks, please let us know and we can take a short break. Now, you've made one statement dated the 25th of September 2018, which you'll find on the desk in front of you in the black folder, and it will also appear on the screen in front of you, and that is RYD 3094225. Can I ask you first, please, to look at the first page of that and confirm that that is your statement to the inquiry?
Yes, it is.
Can I ask you to go to page 14, please, where there's a signature? Is that your signature?
Yes.
Have you read this statement recently?
Yes.
Can you confirm that its contents are true?
Yes.
Now, as well as your personal witness statement, Ryden has given a statement as a company. Have you read that statement?
Not the statement that's in the inquiry, no.
Right. So can I take it from that you didn't contribute to writing it?
I was asked to assist them with some of the evidence gathering for it.
I see. Did you approve it in its final form?
No.
Okay. Have you read it recently?
No.
Right. Before coming here today, can you confirm to us that you haven't discussed the evidence you're going to give today with anybody?
Yes.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to turn first, by way of introduction almost, to some elements of the background and your role as a refurbishment director at Ryden. I think it's right, isn't it, that you were refurbishment director at Ryden for the duration of the Grenfell Tower project?
That's correct, yes.
Are you still employed by Ryden?
Yes, I am.
What is your current role at Ryden, or your current position there?
I'm working for Ryden Homes as a production director.
I'd like to examine briefly, if I may, your role as a refurbishment director, which was a role I think you had occupied from October 2010. Is that right?
Yes.
And I think you came up through the ranks at Ryden, as it were, through being contracts manager, construction manager, and then refurbishment director. Yes?
That's right.
Yes. Can I ask you to look at your statement on page 4, please, and paragraph 2.5.5, project involvement. And you say there, with regards to each project, a team of managers report to me as director on all matters of progress, including safety, and whether the project is on time and to budget. My role is to have an overview, which I report to the maintenance board on a monthly basis. What did the reports you gave to the maintenance board generally comprise?
It was a monthly report that gave, as it says, a picture of where we were to programme it gave an update of commercial matters, and that was its primary task.
And what is the maintenance board, or what was the maintenance board?
It's a board that reports to the Ryden group. So it consisted of a MD, a financial director, a commercial director, and production directors.
And did the composition of that maintenance board comprise directors of the company or companies in the Ryden group?
Yes, I was a director of Ryden Maintenance.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that. But while we're on that, when did you become a director of Ryden Maintenance, or RML, as I think it's called?
As you said, it's 2010.
I see. And did you ever stop being a director of RML?
No,
Are you still today a director of RML?
I am.
Thank you. Are you a director of any other company in the Ryden group?
No.
Can I ask you to look, please, at RYD 404290? This is a site progress report dated the 16th of May, dated the 9th of May, with a board meeting on the 16th of May. And if you could look at the top in capitals, you'll see it says board meeting, 16th of May. Is this an example of the sort of report that you were talking about?
It is.
And we can see that later on it comes from you. Can we take it that you wrote all those reports yourself?
The team that I have, so you have a contracts manager and a commercial manager, they will fill in the respective topics of the report that will be presented to me on a monthly basis, and then I will, if there's any changes or any editing that I wish to do, I will do, and then I submit this to the board on a monthly basis thereafter.
I see. Now, in your statement, you say that you would report on all matters of progress. Did all matters of progress include design decisions which had been made?
Not necessarily. If there was a delay or anything like that, then an abnormal would be reported.
So did it report on the progress that subcontractors had made in implementing decisions?
No, not explicitly.
I see. When a design decision was made, who did you consider was responsible for ensuring that the design was consistent with Ryden's contractual requirements to the TMO?
To the person that was contracted to be responsible for it.
Can we look back at your statement, please, RYD 3094225 at page 10? I'd like just to look with you at what you say about design. At the bottom of page 10, you can see clause 6.3.1, and it says Studio E specified the materials to be used, including Rainabond rain screen cladding and Celotex insulation. And then if we flip over to page 12, in the middle, paragraph 7.1, fire safety, it says, in relation to fire safety, I had no reason to question the suitability of the materials or the design that had been specified to Ryden. And then over at page 13, if we can just look at that, please, paragraph 9.1, it says, under the heading compliance, Ryden, and then you go on to say, and in my experience, principal contractors in general, rely upon the specialist designers and consultant team who specify the materials to be used. Now, I've shown you those three quotations from your statement. Is it your evidence to the inquiry that other parties, primarily Studio E, were responsible for selecting the materials to be used at Grenfell Tower?
Yes.
And that Ryden was, as it were, neutral?
Correct.
Did you ever yourself propose or get involved in the decisions to propose materials for use in the refurbishment of Grenfell Tower?
No.
Can I ask you to go to page 7 of your statement and look at paragraph 4.6? We see here that you address the subject of value engineering. You say, in the course of a project such as this, it is commonplace for discussion to take place about what savings can be made. As part of these discussions, consideration is given to value engineering. This is a process which considers whether savings can be achieved by using alternative materials and methods. Are you familiar, or rather were you at the time familiar, with the RIBA definition of value engineering?
No.
In general, do you agree, or did you think at the time that the purpose of value engineering, where it is carried out, should be to meet the requirements at the lowest cost, but without sacrificing functionality and safety?
I would agree with that, definitely.
Can I ask you to turn to page 2 of your statement and look at paragraph 2.2.9? Here you say, and this was part of your part of what you say a contract manager would do when reporting to you. And perhaps I should just make it easier for you and go to the beginning of the paragraph on page 1, rather than summarising it. You say at the bottom of that page, the role of the contract manager in the refurbishment team is to deliver refurbishment contracts secured by Ryden. This includes, and then if you go over the page, I'd just like to look with you at paragraph 2.2.9, where you say, reporting to the refurbishment director on a regular basis on all the key aspects of the project, including safety, progress, performance management, and financial issues. Do you agree, first of all, that when you reported to the maintenance board that you've described, you did so in relation to whether the project was on time and to budget?
Correct.
Yes. So the question is, where you're doing that, can we take it that you yourself were told all about any value engineering decisions when they were being made?
Not necessarily when they're being made, but when they had been made.
I see.
I'd be told about that, yeah.
I see. And is that something that you as refurbishment director would expect to be kept abreast of by the relevant contract manager?
Yes.
And is it fair to say that you, as the most senior Ryden representative on this project, short of the maintenance board, had the authority to change a plan or to stop the contracts manager if you thought that any step that they were taking was inappropriate?
Yes.
But is it also fair to say that you yourself didn't personally have the expertise to assess whether a material change in design or materials for the project could be made without sacrificing functionality or safety?
That's correct.
So when you got involved in value engineering, what was your actual role?
As what, a director or?
As refurbishment director.
I would be, as a refurbishment director, I would be informed about a choice or a change that the client has made.
You'd be informed about it,
Yeah.
but if you knew nothing about the materials that were going to be changed, the new materials that were being swapped in, new for old, how could you stop that or give advice as to whether that was a wise decision or not?
Well, put it like that, I can't. I would be working on the basis that it had gone through a process of governance to check that that was indeed the case.
Can I ask you to look at paragraph 2.5.4 of your statement at page 4? You say under the heading procurement there, I am responsible for overseeing the procurement process in relation to each new project. And then after that you say the contract manager and the commercial manager produce a procurement schedule. And then you say you then oversee the appointment of suitable contractors, suppliers and consultants. What do you mean by suitable in that context?
That they're competent and available to fulfil the contract.
What due diligence do you generally do, or did you generally do at the time, 2013, 14, 15, into the competence of contractors, suppliers and consultants to make sure that they are or were suitable for the project?
Personally, or
Personally.
as a company?
Personally.
From a personal point of view, I am informed via the progress sheets who the people are with respect to the procurement. I wouldn't individually check out anybody myself, but the governance behind it is such that there is a pre-qualification questionnaire that everyone has to complete and satisfy to assure that there is a level of competence and appropriateness for that employee. And from a personal point of view, 35 years of experience in the construction industry, the majority of contractors I will know about through and have experience of past performance, attitude and behaviour.
Just following something up in that last answer, when you say the governance behind it is that there is a pre-qualification questionnaire that everyone has to complete and satisfy to assure that there's a level of competence and appropriateness for that task. What were the criteria, the objective yardsticks, if you like, by which the suitability of any given subcontractor or proposed subcontractor or subconsultant would be measured?
That they have a company constitution that satisfies the criteria of the questions asked, and details of the competencies that they have.
Mr. Blake, if a new company wanted to be considered by Ryden as a potential subcontractor, what's the method by which it would go about bringing itself to your attention and Ryden would determine whether it was competent or not? Could you just talk us through that? I think that would be helpful.
In the first instance, when we're tendering for a contract, then we will use the bank of our bank of database of knowledge that we have about contractors.
And if we can go back one step,
Yeah.
how does a new company get onto your bank, so to speak, of acceptable subcontractors?
A variety of different ways, and it can be as simple as ringing up and saying, I've heard about this
Right.
job,
Yeah.
I'd like to be considered for it.
Yeah.
Here's the experience that I have. Then they'll be sent the questionnaire to complete to satisfy that.
And that's a standard form questionnaire, is it?
Yes, it is, yes.
So they complete the questionnaire, send it back,
Yeah.
and then what happens?
Then they'd be sent a tender, so they'd produce a quotation for the job.
Okay. Now, before they do that, does anyone evaluate the questionnaire that's come in? Does
Yes,
anyone?
yes. Yeah, that is part of the HSQE function of the company.
Okay.
health, safety, and environmental.
Yeah.
So they have to
Do you, know,
pass.
do you know what sort of inquiries they make, or do you know how they look into whatever's on the form, so to speak?
Yeah, they'd have to demonstrate a track record of safety, of finance, and business systems for their own governance.
Right. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Mr. Whittington.
No, that's very helpful, Mr. Chairman. And within those questionnaires, or perhaps outside those questionnaires, was there ever any investigation into the precise abilities, qualifications, and experience of those subcontractors and subconsultants for the specific project?
Yeah, generally, if they're new to us, then it's old-fashioned is taking up some references,
Right.
and them being able to provide a reference in itself is a positive, and then simply ringing up and asking about them.
Now, I want to ask you about your role as contracts manager, which happened a little bit late in the story, but just jumping ahead to that because we're still on background. If you go to page 7 of your statement, which is still up on the screen, and go to paragraph 4.8, please, you can see there that you tell us that in October 2015, you assumed the role of contract manager in place of Simon Lawrence, who moved on to other employment. Is one of the reasons that you were able to do that that you yourself had previously been a contracts manager?
Yes.
If you look at the penultimate sentence, you say there, as contract manager, I was not based on site but attended regularly. How frequently did you attend the site?
For a 6-month period, I actually counted this up. I went up there from my diary. I think it was 75 times. And that was sort of an average of 2.5 visits a week. And I think I probably made more than that because I'd missed them out rather than record them.
Had Simon Lawrence been based on site?
No.
Where had he been based prior to him leaving Ryden?
A mixture. So he had, at the beginning of the contract, another site to attend to, and he would have meetings in the office in Sussex to attend as well.
You say that after you became contracts manager, you attended on site 2.5 times per week. Were you also engaged on other projects for Ryden, in addition to the Grenfell Tower refurbishment
I was
project?
still maintaining my role as refurbishment director.
Yes, and my question is, were you engaged on other projects? Presumably you were.
Yeah, but not as contracts manager.
Not as contracts manager. How many other projects were you involved in your role as
In
refurbishment director?
in the business stream that I was looking after.
Yes.
There was probably an average of 10.
An average of 10 projects.
Over the 2 years that Grenfell was constructed.
I see. So would it be fair to say that from October 2015 there was no full-time contracts manager looking after the Grenfell Tower refurbishment?
No, I think I was fulfilling a full-time role. I wouldn't expect a contracts manager to do solely one site.
I see. In your absence from site during that period, October 15 onwards, who was the most senior Ryden employee on site?
David Hughes assumed the role of the first in command, if you like.
I see. And did David Hughes assume any of the roles as contracts manager?
He helped out. We shared the load of what we needed to do.
Right. Would you expect in general terms that the contracts manager reporting to you would be familiar with the terms of the contract with Ryden's employer?
They would be familiar, yeah.
And with the terms of the subcontracts to which Ryden was a party?
Yes.
So in order for that model to work, where Ryden was in contract with its client but had subcontracted out to subcontractors and subconsultants, do you agree that it was essential for Ryden to ensure two things? First, that all its responsibilities under its main contract, being a D&B contract, with its client was subcontracted to somebody?
Yes.
And secondly, to ensure that that party was in fact meeting those obligations?
Indeed, yes.
Where a subcontractor's obligations included design, can you help me understand how Ryden would be able to ensure that that person or party was in fact meeting its obligations in circumstances where, as we've heard previously in this inquiry, Ryden had no in-house design expertise itself?
Well, I think as has been examined, the process of ensuring that the subcontractor designs appropriately is going through a process of design development and approval that would ultimately was put to building control for their acceptance.
Perhaps I can take this a little bit differently. If you go to your statement at paragraph 2.2.6 on page 2, we looked at this before. This was a list of things that you would expect to be kept informed of by the contracts manager, and it says monitoring contractors, consultants and suppliers to ensure the aims of the refurbishment project are met. And just looking at monitoring consultants, how would Ryden assess whether a design consultant was meeting its obligations in circumstances where Ryden had no design expertise of its own?
Ensuring that that they meet their obligations is ultimately determined by acceptance of the building control. Monitoring is perhaps a reference to a point in time. So if they were obliged to produce X drawings by a certain time and they don't, then that's part of that monitoring process.
Well, that sounds as if you're saying that in 2.2.6 there, 2.2.6, monitoring simply means keeping tabs on progress. Is that what you're saying? And not tabs on quality?
It's progress and quality as well. That's what I would put under monitoring.
Yes. You see, this is your statement and your words, and I'm just seeking to explore with you what you really mean by monitoring.
Okay.
So when you're monitoring a design consultant, my question is, how would you go about ensuring that they are doing a good job?
Ultimately is by them satisfying the design criteria.
How would you know that?
By it being accepted.
By whom?
By the compliance with the regulation, which would ultimately goes to building control via the architects.
Now, you also say monitoring suppliers. Does that tell us that Ryden, and indeed the contracts manager reporting to you, when monitoring a supplier, would know what materials were being provided and subsequently stored and used on site?
Yeah, that's more of a reference to when we purchase the materials ourselves, which on occasion we do.
And if you look one paragraph down at 2.2.7, monitoring project progress in order to report to the client and refurbishment director, Is it fair to say that the purpose of reporting to the client was so that the client could be aware of how the project was progressing and satisfied that all of the obligations it had imposed on Ryden were being met?
That's fair enough, yeah.
And also, that also included Ryden being able to assure the client that its subcontractors, in turn, were performing in accordance with their own contracts to Ryden.
Yes.
Yes. And is it fair to say, in general terms, that the purpose of the contracts manager reporting these things to you as the refurbishment director was so that you could deal with any ways in which this process was not working?
Yes.
Yes. You, I think, we've seen already at 2.2.9 at the bottom of the page, we've seen this before, where you say the role of the contract manager included reporting to the refurbishment director in relation to things like performance management. You can see the words you used there. When you use the words performance management, do you mean the performance of Ryden and its subcontractors as a chain or group?
Yes, that's more a reference to those that we employ, but any aspect of that.
Did Ryden keep any records of the assessment by the contracts manager or by you as refurbishment director of those assessments?
That would be if there was an issue that it would be part of the monthly report. So if there's an abnormal about progress, that would be put to the board.
Now, sticking with this page, at 2.2.5, you identify a site project team and the wider staff. I just want to explore for a moment the reporting process. When you say at 2.5, a site project team typically consists of site managers, a trainee site manager, and a resident liaison officer. Just hold that, and then also go to 2.5.5, please, which you'll find on page 4. You say a team of managers report to me as director on all matters of progress, including safety and whether the project is on time and to budget. And your role is to have an overview. Just examining the team of managers for the moment. For this project, is this right? Simon Lawrence was the contracts manager until October 2015, yes?
Correct.
The project manager was Simon O'Connor until he left.
In September, yeah.
In September. The commercial manager was Zach Maynard.
Yes.
And the site manager was David Hughes and variously Gary Martin and Danny Osgood.
And Jason.
And Jason North.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
right.
Jack.
And on site.
There was, over a period of time, there was more than that.
I see. Now, on site, who reported, for example, to David Hughes when he became site manager?
Everybody reported to Dave.
Right.
He joined the team, and very soon demonstrated some involvement in the project and leadership, and he assumed that role, which is what I wanted him to do.
And who did the Ryden resident liaison officers report to?
In my role as director, I was responsible for the resident liaison team. The idea is that they don't necessarily report to the managers of the project, because they should retain an independence and an impartial view to represent the feedback between site and the residents. But having said that, they are obviously part of the site team.
I see.
But that's given a little view of them.
Right. You've told us, I think, who they don't necessarily report to. Who did they necessarily report to? Was it you?
Me, yes.
Was that direct?
Yes.
Right. I'm just looking at paragraph 2.5.5 again. You say there that the team of managers would report to you on all matters of progress, including safety. So you highlight safety there. What do you mean by safety in that context?
In that context, it's the safe running of the site during the construction process.
Would that include compliance with statutory standards of safety?
Statutory standards, yes, of course.
Would that include building regulations?
That when you asked the first question, what was that relating to? That comment is about running the site.
I see. So not about safety of design and build.
No.
I follow. Now, you referred to a team of managers reporting to you. How did you receive their reports? Was it in writing, or did you get an oral report?
When I was what, director or
when you were refurbishment director, in your capacity as director, as you refer to there?
We would meet in the week before the board meeting set for everyone to present their formal reports to me that we said at the beginning. We would go through, agree, edit if necessary, and then I would present those to the board. We would generally have a meeting on a Monday, so the contracts managers would be in, commercial manager would be in, resident liaison officer would be in, and we would have an informal report from each of those to me to let me know what's going on with what they're responsible for.
Now, in that last answer, you referred to the presentation of formal reports and then Monday informal reports. Is that...
There's a weekly meeting that we had as a team meeting,
Right.
and then once a month, in the week before the board, there'd be formal reports submitted.
I follow. But just taking it in stages, the weekly meetings, were they informal?
Informal.
So there would be no report in writing to you?
No.
The monthlies, you say they're formal. Are there reports?
Yes.
And they're given to you by whom?
As I said previously, there'll be a section that will be filled in by the contracts manager.
Yes.
And a section by the commercial team.
I see. And would you pass those on to the maintenance board, or would they be for you to use when compiling your report to the maintenance board?
That they would form my report to the board.
Did you write an agenda or outline structure for those reports coming to you, showing what you wanted to know from them?
The reports are in a standard format, so it's already set.
I see. And how would you satisfy yourself that each of Ryden's subcontractors from time to time was meeting its obligations through this reporting process?
From feedback from the individual managers, that would be how I'd find out.
Right. You didn't ever do any spot checks yourself?
I would visit site on any sort of regular basis, but I'd make sure that I'd get round to the sites to take a view of how they were presented.
Did you ever ask those reporting to you to give you assurances that the subcontractors were meeting their obligations on time and to budget?
Generally, we dealt with abnormals, so if anyone wasn't doing
I
what
see.
they should do, then that's what I would expect to be reported to me.
Were complaints from residents ever raised in either the informal or the formal reporting meetings and sessions?
If there was, again, if it was an abnormal and there was a spate of complaints, for example, then I would expect that to be raised to me, because there's got to be a reason for it. So I'd be interested, as you'd imagine, I'd be interested in finding out what that would be.
Now, you said a moment ago that you generally dealt with abnormals. What would you count as an abnormal?
If someone was in financial difficulty, they weren't fulfilling their obligations against their contract, that's an example.
Right. Can I ask you to look at RYD 404258, please? This is an email from you, Mr. Blake, to a lot of people at Ryden, too many to count, and copied to a slightly smaller cast. And its subject, refurbishment, structure changes and promotions. And the date is the 9th of May, 2014. So just for the context, you'd been told you were the winners of the tender, but you hadn't yet signed up to the design and build contract with the TMO. That came in the October of that year. And you say there that the project gives opportunity for individuals to progress their careers and the necessity to recruit. And then you say, in recognition of this, third paragraph down, Zach Maynard has been promoted to commercial manager and assumes responsibility for estimating together with surveying. Simon Lawrence has been promoted to contract manager and will lead the recently secured £9 million regeneration of Grenfell Tower. Simon O'Connor has been promoted to project manager following the success of the St George's estate and will transfer to Grenfell Tower. So, is it right, looking at those three, that for Grenfell, the contracts manager, the project manager, and the commercial manager were all operating their first project in those new roles?
Yeah.
Was it common at Ryden for these three essential roles? I mean, disagree with me if you think they're not essential. But was it common for these roles all to be occupied by newly promoted employees on the same project?
It's not necessarily common, but that's recognition of their abilities to do so. So it's a young, progressive team. So yeah, that was a point in time.
Yes. Of course, would you accept that the flip side of that is that you were putting into this project three individuals who each had no prior experience of the role and position to which you were promoting them?
Yeah, but they, each of them were able to do that role, so I had no worries about that at all.
What systems did Ryden have in place to ensure that these individuals were performing adequately in their new roles?
I would take in the first place a relationship with me and the quality of the exchanges that we have, and secondly, we have a PDR system, which is a personal development review, that you would meet and basically agree a framework of progression and development for that individual.
Was there a mentoring system or system of oversight for those newly promoted to roles, even in the early days, weeks or months of a new role, to make sure that they knew what to do?
I would see the mentoring side would largely fall at my door. There wasn't, a cross-company mentoring. There has been, but I can't say that was the case for the three that you've identified there.
Now, Simon O'Connor told the inquiry on day 26, and it's page 179 at lines 21 to 23. I'm not going to ask you to look at it. But he said that when he was appointed project manager for the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, nobody gave him a job description. Is that correct?
Yes.
And he also said, and it's day 26, page 142, line 17, that nobody gave him any advice or guidance about what to do in his new role. Was that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure what Simon means there. What I know with respect to the role that I wanted him to fulfil on the contract was primarily as a site management role. The title project manager could include a certain level of responsibility of interaction of the design process.
Well, did you ever spell out to Simon?
I didn't give him that.
I'm sorry?
I wasn't expecting him to do that. So his role was primarily as the lead site manager. What I'm trying to say, Mr. Millett, is that the role that he was fulfilling at Grenfell was no different to the role that he fulfilled on his previous contract.
Except that you promoted him to project manager.
Yes, I did, yeah.
So are you saying that that was just a purely nominal promotion?
Partially. At the time, there was a very fierce competition for site managers within the whole building arena, and people were being attracted by very substantial job offers in a market of undersupply. So part of my role is to keep valuable people working for us.
Did you pay Mr. O'Connor more money as a result of his promotion?
Yes, he'd have been given an increase for that, yeah.
Did you tell Mr. O'Connor that even though he was being promoted to project manager, his role on the Grenfell Tower project was exactly the same as it had been as site manager on his previous project?
I didn't have that conversation with him. I would encourage him to grow into that role, so he would have that opportunity.
You would encourage him to grow into the role. Did you ever spell out to Mr. O'Connor precisely where his job began and ended in respect of the new project manager role he was to occupy on Grenfell?
No.
Why is that?
Because I didn't feel I needed to at that point in time.
Did you ever thereafter feel you needed to?
No.
When you became contract manager and took that role over from Simon Lawrence in the October of 2015, who was your line manager?
My line manager is MD of maintenance, that's Jeff Henton.
Right. Would you report to him in the same way, or did you report to him in the same way that Simon Lawrence had reported to you before he gave up his role as contracts manager and left?
Yes, yeah.
You did?
Yes.
Maybe we'll explore that later on. Can I then just switch to a different topic, which is other projects? Now, can we look please first at RYD 3094244? And this is the tender document submitted by Ryden for the Grenfell Tower project dated February 2014. And can I start with page 36, first of all, before we look at other projects? Because I want to ask you one or two questions about Mr. O'Connor's CV. Now, we can see here that it's titled with his new role, Project Manager. Can you see at the top right-hand corner of the page underneath the black box?
Yes.
Yes. And it sets out his responsibilities. Now, in fact, as we've seen from your 9th of May 2014 email, he wasn't appointed to the role of project manager until early May 2014. Are you able to explain why this document says that he was a project manager for this project or proposed project as at the 13th of February 2014?
No.
Did you compile this document?
No.
Who did?
That would be a business development team.
Were you responsible overall for the accuracy of this document?
I would take responsibility for it. Yes, I would.
Did you check it before it was submitted to the TMO?
Not in line for line detail.
Right. Now, you say it was put together by the business development team. Who did the business development team consult, if anybody, when compiling this document?
If they had questions, then they would either consult me or the team that were putting together the tender. It's quite a wide-ranging document.
Do you know who compiled the CVs, such as that for Simon O'Connor that we see on the page here?
That would be one of the business development coordinators.
Right. Do you know? Can you give us a name?
No, I don't know who did that.
Right. Do you know, from your own knowledge, whether they checked those CVs with each of the corresponding individuals? In this case, Simon O'Connor.
Yeah, I think they would do. Yeah.
You think they would do? Did you know?
I can't categorically say yes, but my experience is that they would generally ask for confirmation that the details are correct.
Did you take any steps to ensure that that person in the project, the business development team, had done a proper job of making sure that the CVs were accurate?
I didn't do anything myself. My experience is that generally they are very accurate, and they would check with either the person that they're writing about or a line manager as to the accuracy of it.
Now we've already seen that Mr. O'Connor was said to be project manager when he hadn't yet been appointed. Let's just look together a little bit more closely, if we can, please, at this CV. Can you see that it says in the first paragraph under role within the team that Mr. O'Connor would be coordinating design? You see that? In the second last sentence in the first paragraph under role within the team. He's responsible for all operations on site, including delivery to program and budget coordinating design. You see that?
Sorry, I'm
Right. On the page, you'll see there are two columns, and there's a big black box.
Yes, sorry.
And then second entry down, role within the team.
Yep.
Yes? And it says, Simon is responsible for managing the smooth delivery of the project. He is responsible for all operations on site, including delivery to program and budget, coordinating design. You see the words coordinating design?
Yeah.
Yes. Now, Mr. O'Connor told us in his evidence, and it's day 26, page 20, lines 9 to 10, that's for our purposes, that was inaccurate and that he would not be qualified to do so and would not know where to start coordinating design. Is he correct about that?
In terms of running the design development program with a consultant, he is correct in saying that, and he was never asked to do that. This, for me, is more of a reference of coordinating the trades on site.
Well, trades on site's not the same as design, is it?
No, it's not.
No. Now, he also told us that where it says qualifications HNC building studies, he hadn't completed the HNC. Now, he would know about that, so can we take it that he would be right about that?
Yes.
And then it goes on to say, under benefits to the project, fourth line down, he confidently leads the on-site team in terms of design, technical requirements. So we've now flipped off the page. Can we go back, please, to where we were, which is page 36. Thank you. I'm so sorry, we flipped to a different document. For benefits to the project, 4 lines down. He confidently leads the on-site team in terms of design, technical requirements, health and safety, subcontractor management, and customer care. Now, where it says that he confidently leads the on-site team in terms of design, Mr. O'Connor also told us, day 26, page 21, line 19, that that was not accurate. Is he correct about that?
Yeah, that wasn't what he did at Grenfell.
And it also goes on to say in the next paragraph, he is able to positively contribute technical expertise and facilitate informed choice for clients and residents during value engineering and decision-making processes. And he told us also, day 26, page 22, lines 1 to 4, that he didn't think that he had ever been part of a value engineering process. Is he right about that?
Possibly. Simon is an experienced site manager.
Right.
So yeah.
Okay. And then it goes on to say that he would be, and this is the last sentence of of that same paragraph, this applies to projects at both pre-tender and pre-start stages. And he said, day 26, page 22, line 11, that he was very rarely involved pre-tender. Is he correct about that?
Yes.
Can you explain, Mr. Blake, how these inaccuracies came to be in Mr. O'Connor's CV in the tender documentation for this project?
You're talking specifically about a Grenfell. If he says, very rarely, that would suggest to me that he has been. So on occasion, both pre-tender and pre-start. So we did a job, which location I can't remember, but where Simon was involved in the pre-tender and pre-start stages, but not at Grenfell.
Forgive me, Mr. Blake, it may be my fault, but I've taken you now through, I think, 6 inaccuracies in the way in which Mr. O'Connor's qualifications and experience were portrayed in this document. Can you explain how all of these inaccuracies, or any of them indeed, came to be in Mr. O'Connor's CV in this tender document?
Specifically, no.
Do you accept that you are responsible for these misstatements about Mr. O'Connor's experience and qualifications?
The tender went out in my name, so yes, I am.
And do you accept that you intended the TMO to rely on them so that they would pick Ryden as the winner of the tender?
That's part of their process.
Why didn't you appoint a project manager to this project who was qualified, the many things that you represent Simon O'Connor could do, but which he told us he couldn't do or had no experience of?
Because the requisite competencies that he wasn't asked to do were covered by Simon Lawrence in his role as contracts manager.
Well, that is true, Mr. Blake. That makes Mr. O'Connor's CV a thoroughly misleading document indeed. Would you accept that?
In the way you've described it, then I'm not going to say anything. But yeah, I agree with that.
Let's look at page 32, where we find a version of your CV. Now, did you write this, or was this, again, put together by the business development team?
It would be put together by the business development team. We tender for a lot of contracts, so they're a slightly fluid document in as much as they need to be regularly updated and it needs to give examples of relevant experience.
Did you read and approve this CV before it went out in the tender pack?
I would imagine that I was shown it to approve it, yeah.
Now, halfway down the right-hand column under qualifications, it records that you were a member of the Chartered Institute of Building, the MCIOB,
Yeah,
as well as having obtained an HNC in Building Studies. Is that right?
that's correct.
That is correct. What CPD, continuing professional development, or other training did you do since those qualifications to keep you abreast or up to date with issues and continue to maintain the skills required to perform the job set out here?
In terms of CPD, I haven't done any.
Now, looking at the top left under profile, it says that you've been involved with Ryden since 1985, or at Ryden since 1985,
Yep.
and involved in a number of different projects with Ryden prior to Grenfell Tower. I just want to ask you some questions about two of those. First, Chalcott's estate. Now, it's right, isn't it, I think, that Ryden and Harley had worked together on projects at the Chalcott's estate in around 2006 to 2009.
That's correct.
Yes. And you worked as contracts manager on the Chalcott's estate project, I think, didn't you? What did your role on that project entail as contracts manager?
As described in my personal statement.
The refurbishment of high-rise blocks. We're looking at the middle of the paragraph. I think you want us to look at the middle paragraph. You say the works comprise of a full internal and external upgrade to the blocks, including new kitchens and bathrooms, central heating systems, roofwork, and recladding.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, that isn't quite an answer to my question. My question is, what did your role as contracts manager entail on that project?
Sorry, I was referring to my personal statement where I described the role of contracts management.
Oh, I see. When you say personal statement, you mean your witness statement, not
Oh,
the
yeah,
CV.
sorry, yeah,
All right.
witness
Well,
statement.
let me ask a different way, or a different question. There was cladding work, as we can see from the CV. That was carried out by Harley, wasn't it?
Yes.
As a subcontractor to Ryden, yes?
Yes.
Was that a design and build contract?
It wasn't design and build, but they were responsible for design.
I see. And the panels on that building were ACM, aluminium composite material panels manufactured by Arconic, or Alcoa, as I think they were.
That's correct.
Yeah. What role did you have as contracts manager on that project in the selection of materials, specifically the ACM panels? Can you remember?
I had no part in the selection of those panels.
I see. Was a fire safety engineer used on that project? Do you know?
If it was, it would have been the employ of the architects.
Do you know?
I don't know that.
You don't know. Now, you also talk about the Ferrier Point Canning Town project, and looking
Yes.
at your CV, that's the paragraph above, the second paragraph down under relevant project experience. And on that project, you were, I think, in your current role, namely refurbishment director, or rather the role you had as at the date of the Grenfell Tower project.
Yes.
Yes. And in that role, were you responsible for overseeing the installation by Harley of ACM rain screen cladding?
I had a contracts manager reporting to me.
Right.
As we described earlier.
I see. And my question was actually directed at installation, but it could be a wider question. Were you responsible for overseeing the selection as well as the installation of ACM cladding
No.
on that project? No. Do you remember how Harley came to be involved in that project?
In Ferrier Point,
Yes.
they were given the opportunity to quote for the job.
Right. Now, CEP were also involved in that project, weren't they?
Yes, they were.
How did they come to be involved?
They're Harley's preferred supply chain partner to be the fabricator of the cladding panels.
Right. Were there fabricated cladding panels at Ferrier Point?
I think so. Yeah,
Right.
there would have been parts to cut and bend.
I see.
Yes.
We can see that in this tender pack, which was obviously for a project with overcladding of a high-rise building, you're making prominent here your experience as relevant, Ferrier Point and Chalcots. Is it fair to say, Mr. Blake, that your role at Chalcots and Ferrier Point demonstrate that you yourself had considerable personal experience of overcladding projects before Grenfell Tower,
Yes.
and in senior roles at that?
Yes.
Yes. You mentioned two. Were there any other overcladding projects that you'd been involved in prior to Grenfell Tower, in addition to Ferrier Point and Chalcots?
No, there's not. No. Oh, there's a reference to Ashmole there, but that was clad in insulation and render.
Yes. Now, just looking at the right-hand column, the role within the team, can you see that, just under the black box?
Yes.
It says, so Steve is responsible for H&S, strategic partnering, relationships with clients, supply chain management, training, recruitment, managing the refurbishment element of the group business. Do you agree with that summary?
Yes.
So you were responsible for health and safety?
That is, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
responsibility for me, yeah.
Yeah. What did supply chain management mean?
Well, it's just strategic partnering relationship with clients is what it says, and then on the opposite side, we will have informal supply chain management relationships with key subcontractors.
Yeah. And then it goes on to say, in the last paragraph there, or part of the last paragraph, to achieve a best value, high quality service delivery. You see that?
Yes.
Is it fair to say that achieving a best value delivery was Ryden's priority?
It's not necessarily a priority. It's part of our obligations under contract.
Yes, I see. I was just trying to get a feel for best value as opposed to high quality, and which was your priority there?
They're the same thing for me.
Right. I just want to ask you some questions. Mr. Chairman, this will take no more than 5 minutes, so it may be.
I suggest you carry on.
I will do. Thank you. I just want to ask you some questions about your awareness at the time of different kinds of cladding and other cladding fires. At the time of the Grenfell Tower project, and I say that, obviously it spanned 4 years, but at the time of Ryden's involvement, were you aware of the different kinds of cladding panels available in the United Kingdom?
In sorry, what respect?
Well, let me break it down for you. Were you aware at the time that, first, that cladding panels were made with a variety of different materials, including metals and metal composite elements?
Yes, I was, yeah.
You were. And were you aware that panels made from aluminium composite material, or ACM as we call it, frequently contained a core made from polyethylene, or PE?
Yes, I was.
And were you aware that PE was combustible?
No. But obviously, plastic is combustible, so. But I didn't think of it like that.
You didn't think of it like that. All right. Now, panels. Well, were you aware that panels were also available? So ACM panels were also available with a fire retardant core, which was less combustible than a standard polyethylene core.
Yeah, I was not aware of that.
Not aware. To your knowledge, at the time, was there any awareness within Ryden generally about the combustibility of polyethylene as part of an ACM panel, or the availability of different kinds of panels with fire-resistant cores?
There was no knowledge of that.
No knowledge at all. Were you aware in general terms of the potential fire risks that aluminium rain screen claddings with a PE core posed?
No.
Were you aware of major fires which had occurred in residential buildings, whether in the UK or overseas, involving cladding? For example, the fire at Knowsley Heights in 1991?
Not that one.
Garnet Court, Irvine, 1999?
No,
What about Lakenall House in Southwark in 2009?
I'd been made aware of that one. Yeah.
You had been made aware, so you were aware of it at the time.
It came up at dialogue when we were at Grenfell.
Yes. Okay. Well, we may come back to that in due course. Were you aware of a spate of fires in high-rise buildings in the UAE in 2012 to 2013?
No.
Mr. Chairman, I'm now going to turn to a different topic, which is quite a long topic, and I won't finish before I may finish before the break, but I doubt I will.
Would it be more sensible to stop now?
Yes, and we could stop now.
Right. We're going to have a break now then, Mr. Blake. I have to ask you, please, not to talk to anyone about your evidence or anything to do with the refurbishment while you're out of the room, and that will apply when we have later breaks in the proceedings, all right? So we'll stop now and we'll resume at, can we say past, Mr. Millett?
I'd rather say 25 past if it's not inconvenient to you or the witness. Right, and I'm sorry.
We'll say 25 past
Negotiate.
11, and we'll take it on from there. All right? Thank you very much. Would you like to go with the usher, please? Right, 25 past 11. Yes, would you ask Mr. Blake to come back, please? All right, Mr. Blake, you ready to carry on?
I am. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, Mr. Miller.
Mr. Blake, I'd like just to look at the contract with you, if I may. Can I ask you, please, to be shown TMO 100-41791? This is, as you can see from this page, the amended JCT design and build contract by which Ryden was appointed by the TMO as the main contractor on the Grenfell Tower project. And it's dated the 30th of October 2014. Just looking at its first page there, Mr. Blake, are you familiar with this document?
I am.
You are. Can I ask you please to go to page 14? Now we can see there a signature as a witness at the bottom of the screen there. Who executed this as a deed by RML, Ryden Maintenance Limited?
Are you asking me who the signature in blue is?
Yes.
That's Jeff Henton.
That's Jeff Henton, is it? Right. Now, you've told us that part of your role as a refurbishment director was to liaise with your team of managers to ensure that the client's requirements were being met and report on that to Ryden's management board. Is it fair for us to assume that in order to do that, you were familiar with the terms of this contract?
Yes.
Yeah. Did you ever study this contract in detail?
This part of the contract?
No, all of it.
Not in minute detail, no.
Is it fair to assume that you expected all Ryden's employees who were working on the Grenfell Tower project to be familiar, at least in outline, with the contents of this document?
Yes.
And to abide by the obligations contained in it?
Yes.
Yes. Now, you told us this morning at page 45, line 1, that part of, as you understood it, part of Ryden's obligation under its contract with its client was to achieve a best value, high quality service delivery. Was that your understanding about what this contract reflected, in general terms?
This and any contract.
Right. So, just to be clear, you're clear in your evidence that at the time you understood that Ryden was contractually obliged to achieve a best value, high quality service delivery.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, subject, of course, to the matters contained in detail in the small print, if I can put it that way. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Can I ask you to look at page 15, please, Appendix 1, which is a set of amendments and insertions, as you can see there. It's right, isn't it? I think we can see this, that these were specifically negotiated with the TMO for this project.
Okay.
Do you remember that? And we can look on a bit if you like, if you flip the pages.
I don't necessarily remember it, but I understand what it is.
Right. Well, let me ask it a slightly different way. Who at Ryden was responsible for considering and negotiating and agreeing the amendments and insertions to this contract that we can see, although we don't see it on that page?
We would have our in-house legal team advise with respect to what we sign up to.
And who at Ryden would give instructions to the in-house legal team as to what they wanted and didn't want in the formal contractual document which Ryden eventually signed?
The legal team would give us advice as to what is appropriate or not.
Indeed. And who is the us in that answer?
That would be the production team, so call it me.
Right. So, I see. So can we be clear about this, that you, Mr. Blake, would be the point of contact for the legal team, so that if you had a question, you would be the one to ask the legal team, and if they had a question, that you would be the one they would ask?
Yes.
Yes. Is it fair to assume that you in your role, understood that as design and build contractor, Ryden retained the ultimate responsibility for the design of the Grenfell Tower refurbishment and works?
Yes.
And did you understand that Ryden was responsible for carrying out and completing the works in a proper and workmanlike manner,
Yes.
in accordance with statutory requirements,
Yes.
and in accordance with good building practice?
Yes.
Yes. Can I ask you to look at page 19 in this document and look at clause 2.1.5.1? Halfway down the page, you can see a long clause there, which is part of what Ryden is promising to the TMO. And can you see that there's a new clause 2.1.5 where it says under 2.1.5.1, the contractor warrants that it has not used and shall not use and has exercised and shall continue to exercise the standard of skill and care required by clause 2.17.2.1, which we'll come to ensure that it has not and shall not specify, authorise, cause or allow to be used in the works any products or materials which, and then if you look immediately below that, under 2.1.5.1.1, say, do not conform with British or European standards where appropriate, or codes of practice, or where no such standard exists, do not conform with a British Board of Agreement certificate. And then underneath that, under 2.1.5.2, the contractor will immediately notify the employer if it becomes aware of any proposed or actual specification and or use in the works of any products and or materials which do not comply with clause 2.1.5.1. Now, when you witnessed this contract, I know you didn't execute it, but when you witnessed it, did you look at that provision, do you think?
I would doubt it, but that's not anything that I haven't seen before.
Right, so you would your understanding was that you expected this provision to be in there.
It seems, perfectly reasonable and,
Normal.
Yes.
Normal provision, right.
Yeah.
Can I ask you to look at page 22 and look at clause 2.17.1 then? You can see there that it says that under that, the contractor shall, to the extent set out in clause 2.17.2.1 below, be fully responsible in all respects for the design of the works, including, and then you can see some inclusions, and at 2.17.1.1, first of all, design in the employer's requirements. I'm summarising it, but you can see that. And at 2.17.1.2, not limited to the coordination and integration of all design and integration of all design and the interface between design elements for the works, whether carried out by the contractor or by any other party engaged on the works. And the contractor shall adopt and take responsibility for any design work in relation to the works which may be carried out or which may have been carried out by professional consultants or specialist subcontractors or by any other person at the request of the employer. And then just look at it with me, 2.17.1.3, all aspects of design development, selection of goods and materials, and the satisfaction of performance specifications included or referred to in the employer's requirements, the contractor's proposals, this contract, or any change. Now, I've shown you that in full. My question is, again, did you know that those obligations were in the contract when you witnessed it?
I'd understand that to be
Yes.
Our obligations, yes.
So did you therefore understand that whether or not Ryden chose to subcontract those responsibilities to other parties was entirely up to Ryden, and it made no difference to the fact that they were ultimately Ryden's responsibilities to its client, the TMO?
Yes, I did. I think Grenfell was slightly unusual because we had two significant novations, but apart from that, I would understand that to be so.
Right. And the significant novations were who?
The architect and the structural engineer.
Yes. Can I ask you to look at page 16, please, at the bottom of the page there, just going back a bit in the document, under practical completion, there's a definition there, It says practical completion takes place when the works, as are defined, are complete for all practical purposes pursuant to clause 2.27, and in particular, the relevant statutory requirements have been complied with and any necessary consents or approvals obtained. To your understanding at the time, well, first of all, did you know that that provision or definition was in there?
That's what I understood it to mean, yeah.
Yeah. And would compliance with the relevant statutory requirements, to your understanding, did that include the building regulations?
Yes.
Yes. Now, I want to turn to a slightly different topic, which is Ryden's role and expertise. In his written evidence, Mr. Lawrence has told the inquiry that Ryden's approach to a project like Grenfell, and I can show you the provision if you want, but I'll just tell you what he says, was to appoint a specialist third-party designer to undertake the design works and work package subcontractors to undertake the building aspects of a project. And then he says this: Ryden's role was to then manage and coordinate the work of those third parties. Is that a fair description of Ryden's approach to the project? Or to a
I
project
think
like Grenfell?
it's a fair description of the role of principal contractor in the industry.
Right. Now let's look at your statement. RYD 30942225 at page 10, please. If we can just look at the bottom of the page at paragraph 6.1 and 6.2, where you describe the role of principal contractor there. And you say, as principal contractor, Ryden's role was to manage the project and coordinate the various contractors to ensure so far as possible that the refurbishment was completed safely, on time and to budget. This is achieved by appointing and coordinating contractors to implement the design work undertaken by them or by others. As principal contractor, Ryden's role is not to undertake any design work or to carry out the construction work itself. And then at 6.2, you say, the designs were undertaken by Studio E and Curtins and those other contractors who had design responsibilities, including J.S. Wright and Harley. Now, just putting that to you, I just want to set that beside what the Ryden Company witness statement says. We can just look at that as well. It's RYD 3094236, and I'd like to go to page 153, please, and look at paragraph 390, and you say there, or it says there, as set out above, RML would rely on Harley, and following the novation of its appointment to RML, Studio E to advise on the appropriate design for the facade, including the cavity barriers. I've shown you both of those, one from your statement and one quotation from the Ryden Company statement. What was your understanding of the complexity of the task that's described there, namely the design of the facade, including for cavity barriers?
I'm sorry, I don't understand that question.
Well, let me put it a different way. The coordination of design and the input into design on this project was a complex one. Do you accept that?
Same as numerous contracts.
Right. Is it fair to say that Ryden didn't have a team in-house which was expert in matters of the appropriate design for the facade?
They didn't have the design competence, no.
And didn't have the design competence on advising or coordinating the design of, for example, cavity barriers, the installation of, or design of cavity barriers?
Not specifying it, no.
Or designing where they go or what they should be?
No.
No. And indeed, Mr. Lawrence says in his written evidence, and just for your purposes and our purposes, it's paragraph 40 in his statement on page 8, that Ryden didn't have any in-house design expertise and did not directly employ construction operatives. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yes. So Ryden had no design team of its own in-house at all. I think that's what you're telling us.
No, and I'd go back to the first point is a principal contractor. That is how the majority would operate within the industry.
Yes. Well, that's you say that. Let's just see if I can get your evidence. At the time, just to be perhaps labour the point a little bit, just agree or disagree. is it right that Ryden, in general, had no in-house expertise in the design or construction of rain screen cladding facades?
In terms of the design, we weren't the designers. We had plenty of experience of the construction of on the previous contracts that we've worked on.
You say you had experience of construction, but the construction itself would be done by construction subcontractors, would it not?
As with us as principal contractor, yeah.
Indeed. Ryden also, I think, had no in-house expertise in the selection or specification of materials to be used in the construction of rain screen facades.
No, we didn't.
And no expertise in-house in the fire safety of such facades.
No.
And no in-house expertise in whether or not such facades did or didn't comply with the building regulations.
No, we didn't.
And it would follow from that, although we'll come to it in a moment, therefore no in-house expertise on whether or not a rain screen facade complied with approved document B forming part of the building regulations.
That would be correct.
Yeah. Do you accept that Ryden required advice, accurate advice, and input to be given by its subcontractors on all the issues we've just discussed together, and to be proactive about that? Because Ryden's lack of expertise on those matters meant that it couldn't spot potential non-compliances.
Yeah, I mean, that's why we employed the people to advise us.
What procedures did Ryden have in place to ensure that each of the subcontractors appointed in areas where Ryden had no in-house expertise was suitably qualified to fill the gaps in Ryden's expertise?
Well, if you take the example of Grenfell and cladding and Harley's, that would be, obviously we've got the in-house governance procedure of the firm as a constitution, and we've got knowledge and experience of the work they've carried out in the past.
Did those systems you've just described contain any feature or process for making sure that the particular people within the subcontractor, for example Harley in this case, were qualified to make assessments as to whether design and selection of material did comply with statutory requirements, including building regulations?
I didn't check that. I didn't, but I know that the CVs of the individuals from Harley's were part of the tender submission, so I had no reason to think that they weren't inappropriate to do that.
My question was a slightly different one, which was whether Ryden's systems you've described contained any process for making sure that the particular people at, for example, Harley, could tell whether a piece of material or a design was compliant with statutory requirements. It's really about Ryden's process.
No, I can't say that.
Did Ryden take any steps as a company or group to ensure that its employees on this project understood the regulatory requirements with which Ryden was obliged under the contract that we've seen to ensure compliance?
In terms of specifics to Grenfell, no, but there was a suite of training modules that would be put to the management within the business. So, yeah.
A suite of training modules that would be put to the management within the business. Let me just explore that.
Okay.
This is at the time of the Grenfell Tower project, so from 2013 to 16. To whom in the business would those training modules be delivered?
Across the group. So, would you like some examples?
Well, let me just pursue it my way. Did any of those modules include how to go about supervising an architect?
No,
Did any of those modules train anybody on how to go about supervising a specialist subcontractor?
no.
Did any of those modules give anybody any training on how to coordinate the design process?
Not specific to that, no.
Did any of those training modules include anything at all about fire safety in the context of in the context of high-rise residential buildings?
No,
Did any of those training modules include anything at all about the combustibility of any materials in any project?
nope,
Did any of those training modules include anything about fire safety in relation to high-rise buildings in particular?
nope,
Did any of those training modules include any education at all about the history of high-rise fires in the UK or overseas?
no.
Right. Now, you say in your statement that Ryden's role was not to undertake any design work or to carry out the construction work itself. So, in general, does that tell us that the service that Ryden was going to provide to its client was really a pure management service?
As you've said, yes.
Yes. But we've seen from the contract that Ryden, and I think you've accepted, that Ryden was entirely responsible to the TMO for carrying out and completing the design and the construction in accordance with the contractual obligations we've seen, not simply managing it and coordinating it. Do you accept that?
I have done, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that Ryden had taken responsibility itself on its own shoulders to its client for the design work carried out by consultants or subcontractors?
In terms of the contractual chain, that's where we are.
Yes.
But we would manage that by flowing those responsibilities to those who are able to provide that advice.
Yes, but was your understanding, nonetheless, that Ryden remained obliged to ensure that the project complied with the building regulations, whether
Yes.
or not it's subcontracted?
I am, yes.
Yes. And that products and materials selected on the project complied with the relevant British and European standards? Yeah. And in simple terms, Mr. Blake, was it your understanding that you could comply with your contractual obligations simply by offloading them onto other people?
I think offloading is not correct against... We placed that responsibility and employed people to provide that advice. We're not... Offloading suggests that we're relieving ourselves of responsibility. That's not how we do it.
No. So your understanding, just to be clear, was that you couldn't comply with your contractual obligations merely by appointing other people to do the things that you promised the TMO you would do.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the first part of the sentence.
So is it right that your understanding at the time was that you couldn't comply with your obligations, or you weren't complying with your contractual obligations simply because you'd appointed subcontractors to do the things that you had promised the TMO you would do?
That's how we fulfilled that obligation, by employing people to carry out those items on behalf of the contract.
Yes, but you still, was it your understanding that you still retained contractual responsibility?
Yes.
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 Now, Mr. Lawrence told us that he didn't recall there being a design responsibility matrix for this project, or a design responsibility document. And that was, for our purposes, day 22, page 106 at line 18. Is he or was he correct about that?
I'm not entirely sure what a design responsibility matrix is. I know what it's saying. My recollect is that there was a very clear set down of the design responsibility from the pre-start minutes and the meetings that had taken place to do that. I also saw that the relationship between the architect and Harley's was very clear between itself. So for me, it was clearly identified.
Now, did you ever consider at the time what expertise Ryden needed to make sure that the requirements of the building regulations were met by its subcontractors?
My understanding and expectation is that is the role of the architects to fulfil.
I think you've agreed with me before that Ryden didn't instruct a specialist fire consultant for the Grenfell Tower project. That's right, is it?
That's correct.
So, is this right, that you were looking to, when you say the architects, you mean Studio E,
Yes.
to advise you as to whether or not a design or product or material complied with the requirements of the building regulations?
Yes.
Is that how you saw it?
Yeah, that would be part of the design exchange between Studio E and, if we're talking about cladding, Harley's.
And would it be fair to say, in light of that answer, that neither you nor anybody else at Ryden investigated or checked the compliance of any material or product used on the project?
That's correct.
And indeed the design of any aspect of certainly the cladding on the project?
Correct.
Yeah. Does it follow from that Ryden not only would not, but actually couldn't itself know whether it was properly performing its own obligations to the TMO to select compliant materials?
Well, we relied on others, so you'd be correct in saying that. Yeah.
Yes. So they might select something, but you wouldn't have any means yourself of knowing whether it was right or wrong, or compliant or not compliant?
Not from Ryden's point of view, no.
No. So does it come to this, that you trusted your subcontractors to get it right without any means of knowing yourself whether they had or not?
We employed them on the basis that was their obligation to provide that information and advice.
Now, forgive me for labouring the point, but let me just pursue this a little bit further. In his written evidence, Mr. Lawrence says that his role on the project, and this is paragraph 45 of his statement, included ensuring that the designs comply with clients' requirements. And my question is, how could any contract manager on this project ensure that a design met the client requirements if Ryden didn't have an in-house client team, or an in-house design team?
I would say that's it's still ultimately our Ryden's responsibility to do that. So that's what I imagine he's referring to.
Yes, it's still ultimately Ryden's responsibility, but Ryden, I think what you're saying is that Ryden didn't actually have the equipment, the expertise to discharge that responsibility itself.
As a company, no, but as from an employee, yes.
When you say as from an employee, you do...
Well, with the people that we'd employ to provide that on behalf of the project.
Oh, I see. Not employees, but subcontractors.
Yes.
I see. Can I then ask you to look at a document, which is the NBS specification? So it's a change of topic, to some extent at least. Were you familiar in general terms, when you came into the project, Mr. Blake, of the NBS specification?
I was, yeah.
You were. Do you remember whether you read it?
Not to cover, no.
Now, you, as we've seen, signed Ryden's tender. Well, we haven't seen it, actually. But do you recall signing Ryden's tender on the 13th of February, 2014?
Oh, sorry. Yes, I do. Yes.
And we can look at it if you like. But
Yeah, we saw it earlier.
yeah, we did. Do you recall that the tender was based on the employer's requirements, which included Studio E's NBS specification?
Yes.
And although that specification went through a number of drafts, I think the most recent date on it was the 30th of January 2014. Let's look at that. It's SEA 50169, please. Here is the first page, and there's the date I mentioned. Again, just for your purposes, this is the last draft that we can see of a version of this document that had been through some previous amendments in the November of 2013. Did you read this document when considering and compiling the tender?
No.
You didn't. Did you ever read this document?
When I assumed the role of contracts management, there would be occasion for me to read it.
I see. So does that tell us that between winning or between bidding for this project in early 2014 and your assumption of the role of contracts manager on this project in October 2015, you didn't read the NBS specification?
No, and I wouldn't expect to either.
All right.
In my role.
Okay. And when you did, after October 2015, when you assumed the role of contracts manager, did you read it all through then, or any in part?
I doubt it.
What occasioned you to look at it at that stage?
I can't specifically recall what I'd have looked at.
Well, let's see how we go. Can I ask you, please, to turn first to page 68? And I'd like to look with you, please, at paragraph 220, specification. And it says there, and this is, I should just be clear, under the part of the NBS specification, H92 rain screen cladding. Just in general terms, Mr. Blake, are you familiar with the layout and general format of this document?
Yes.
Not particularly this one for this project, but in general, NBS specifications in general.
Yes.
Yeah. And are you familiar with the way they're compiled?
Yes.
Yes. So it's 220 specification. It says compliance standards, the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, quote, standard for systemized building envelopes, unquote. Reference information for the duration of the contract, keep available at the design office, workshop and on-site copies of the Centre for Window and Cladding Technology, CWCT, standard for systemized building envelopes, publications invoked by the CWCT standard for systemized building envelopes. Did you read that paragraph at any time during your involvement on this project?
No.
No?
No.
Were you aware, as Mr. Lawrence had told us, that despite the NBS saying what it says here, there was no copy of the CWCT standard for systemized building envelopes present either at the design office, the workshop, or on site?
There wasn't one on site, and had we had a need to refer to it, then I would probably, in the simplicity, ask Harley's to provide us with either a copy or an extract,
right.
Or we could purchase one ourselves. But there wasn't one on
Right.
site.
Were you aware, in general terms, of the CWCT?
Yes.
You were. Were you familiar with the standard for systemized building envelopes?
Not specifically, but I knew about the CWCT.
You knew about... What was your understanding of what the CWCT did?
That they were an industry body that stood behind, systemised building envelopes.
Yes.
So they were a federation, if you like.
Yes, I see. Were you aware that the CWCT had produced a standard called Standard for Systemized Building Envelopes?
No, not at the time. No.
No. At the time, were you familiar with the standard?
not the standard, but I knew that this body existed.
Right. Let me just show it to you, and then if you haven't seen it before, or hadn't at the time, then we can move on. CWCT, please. CWCT 6046. This is the first page of it, and you can see that it has a number of parts, including Part 6, Fire Performance. Is this a document that you had seen at the time?
No.
Is it a document you've seen since?
No.
Right. Can I then ask you some questions about building regulations and associated guidance? As the most senior individual on this project, on a day-to-day basis at least, did you give any consideration at the time yourself to the regulatory requirements which applied to it?
When I was director or contracts manager?
When you either?
When I'm a director, that's obviously I'm very interested that the necessary compliances and approvals are being sought and worked through. And when I was performing the contracts manager's role, that was my role to make sure that they were being obtained from the respective authorities.
At the time Ryden won the contract for the Grenfell Tower project in March 2014, were you familiar with Schedule 1 to the building regulations?
I didn't have a specific that I could quote verbatim from the building regs, but I certainly had an understanding of the structure and the purpose of them.
Right. So you were familiar with or you had an understanding of the functional requirements, did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I am, yeah.
Were you familiar with Part B, fire safety, contained within Schedule 1?
I knew that was a part of the building regs, yes.
Right. Were you familiar with the different elements of Part B 1 to 5?
I couldn't quote what 1 to 5 were, but I'm aware that there were subsections within a topic.
Were you aware that one of the subsections, it happens to be Part B4, related to external flame spread?
I would like to say yes, but I can't categorically say that.
Right.
I know about it now, clearly, but I can't say that I did at the time.
Well, let me try it in general terms. Were you familiar with a requirement in the building regulations that an external wall shall adequately resist the spread of fire over the walls and from one building to another?
Yeah, I understood that principle, yeah.
You understood the principle. And were you familiar with such a principle relating to the roof of the building adequately resisting the spread of fire?
In the same way, yes.
Were you familiar, or were you aware, that in order to determine whether an external cladding system complied with the obligation to adequately to resist the spread of fire over the walls, required a designer to consider the fire performance of each of the components of the system?
I would take that as, yeah, that would be my understanding, yeah.
It would. And would that understanding extend to understanding that the designer would have to think about the particular type of cladding, panels and insulation specified for the system?
I would take that, yeah.
Right. Were you also familiar that another part of the requirements, this is B3, required the designer to ensure that the subdivision of the building with fire-resisting construction was done where that was reasonably necessary to inhibit the spread of fire within the building?
Yes.
And also that the building should be designed and constructed so that the unseen spread of fire and smoke within concealed spaces and structures and fabric is inhibited.
Yes.
You'd understand that?
Yes.
Right. Was your understanding that you just described to us one which was widespread within Ryden, do you think?
I'd like to say yes.
Okay, you'd like to, but can you?
In the role of a contracts manager, having experience of constructing different buildings, then yes.
Yes. Now, the familiarity with the functional requirements that you've explained to us, was that something that you had learnt formally or something that you'd learnt in another way?
Well, we've received training on a CDM, for example, and we do. There's at the time there was a series of modules of safety training, 1 to 5. In those modules, it would refer to the obligation to comply with statute and regulation. But to answer your question, not specifically.
You say we've received training on CDM. CDM stands for what?
Construction Design Management
Yep.
Regulations.
And that, you say, you received training on that, and there was a series of modules of safety training.
Yeah.
Was there... it sounds as if what you're telling us is that your knowledge or familiarity with the functional requirements came from that training.
Well,
is that right?
Part of it does.
Right.
Again, it goes knowledge and experience of building many buildings.
Can you remember how the training that you've described was delivered within Ryden?
It sometimes relates to events. So there was a change in the CDM legislation around the time 2015. So we had a training to give us a refresher, an update as to what the changes meant, to how we sat against those regulations. So that was an example of a reason and a recognition of an event, if you like.
Who delivered that training?
I can't recall. Usually it would be maybe an outside, an external consultant would come in and give a training to an audience of those identified that would benefit from it.
And who were those identified who would benefit, who received this training?
Well, it would be those in a management role within the maintenance business and construction business.
So we know you did. Who else did? Can you tell us?
I don't know. I can't give you a list of names.
Are there lists available of who received this training?
Yeah.
Right. And was this training delivered in 2013 or 14?
It was 15 when I think that particular training was delivered.
I see. So was this training delivered in contemplation of the new CDM regulations coming in 2015?
Yeah, that's given an example of why training would be provided.
I see. Was there any training that you've described which would have educated people like Simon Lawrence or Simon O'Connor, for example, in Ryden, on the building regulations and specifically the functional requirements that we've been discussing?
It's not my experience that there was a training course specific to that.
Right. Turning to approved document B, at the time Ryden won the Grenfell Tower project, were you personally at all familiar with approved document B, forming part of the building regulations?
I knew that was part of it.
Did you know what its purpose was?
Like say verbatim, no.
No, but did you know what its purpose was? What was it for?
To ensure compliance against the regulations that it identifies.
I see. Before the Grenfell Tower project came along for you, had you personally ever read that guidance set out in approved document B?
I don't know. I don't think I have, no.
Were you familiar with it at the start of your job as refurbishment director?
What, as in having read it?
Yes.
No.
No. Were you ever familiar with its contents, whether at the time you were a refurbishment director with responsibility for Grenfell or as contract manager on Grenfell?
Like I say, I can't, I couldn't quote it specifically or verbatim, but I knew that it existed.
Right, let's see how far we go. Can I ask you to look at CLG 50224, please? Now, that's page 1, and there it is. And it's got a big green B on it, so it's not easy to miss. Does this look familiar to you?
Yes.
Would it have, or did it look familiar to you at the time? 2013, 14, 15?
It would have done, yes.
I see. Did you know at the time that it was issued under the Building Act 1984 to provide practical guidance with respect to the requirements of the building regulations?
I didn't know that specifically, but I'm familiar with this layout.
All right. Can we look at page 95, please? Now, here we can see 12.5 on the right-hand side under the heading External Wall Construction. And let's look at that together. It says under the first paragraph, or in the first paragraph under that heading, the external envelope of a building should not provide a medium for fire spread if it is likely to be a risk to health or safety. The use of combustible materials in the cladding system and extensive cavities may present such a risk in tall buildings. And then it goes on in the next paragraph. External walls should either meet the guidance given in paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9 or meet the performance criteria given in the BRE report, Fire Performance of External Thermal Insulation for Walls of Multi-Storey Buildings, BRE 135, for cladding systems using full-scale test data from BS 8414, 2002 or 2005. Now, were you familiar, even if not verbatim, but in principle, with what is said there?
I'm familiar with obviously the first paragraph, and then it goes down into detail of how it should meet the guidance. I would go back to that is why we employ experts to provide that guidance for us.
Right. Now, your CV, and I don't want to go back to it, but it said that you were responsible for health and safety, and that safety was one of the things that you were, in your role, responsible for overseeing. Yeah. Were you aware of the risk to health and safety presented by the use of combustible materials in cladding systems and cavities?
No.
You weren't?
No.
We can see from paragraph 12.5 subpara 2, or the second paragraph in it, external walls, do you see that?
Yes.
That there are two routes offered here for compliance. The first is the guidance in paragraphs 12.6 to 12.9, and the second is meeting the performance criteria in BR 135 using full-scale test data in BS 8414. Were you, at the time, aware of those two routes to compliance?
No.
To your recollection, even if you weren't aware of the routes, was there ever any discussion that you can recall about which route to compliance was proposed for the system to be used at Grenfell Tower?
There was no discussions.
Can I ask you to turn the page and look at 12.7, please? It says, in a building with a story 18 metres or more above ground level, any insulation product, filler material, not including gaskets, sealants and similar, etc., used in the external wall construction should be of limited combustibility. See Appendix A. This restriction does not apply to masonry cavity wall construction, which complies with diagram 34 in section 9. Now, just focusing on the words limited combustibility there, Mr. Blake, at the time of the Grenfell Tower project, at any time during your involvement in it, did you have an understanding of what the words limited combustibility meant?
Again, I'd like to say yes, I was. I understood that. If I go back to the first paragraph, that it says that it shouldn't catch fire, then it would be of limited combustibility. So I would put the two together.
Right. Did you know the difference or understand the difference at the time between something that was non-combustible, something that was combustible, and something that was of limited combustibility?
I knew that there was definitions, but I didn't know, what the boundaries were between them.
Right. And you could see there's a reference to Appendix A. Were you familiar with Appendix A? Have you ever had a chance to read it?
I have subsequently, but I didn't at the time, no.
Right. Did you have any working knowledge about BR135 and full-scale testing in BS8414 tests?
That wasn't. I can't say that I had that as a consideration at the time of Grenfell.
Did you have any understanding of what those things were?
Again, I didn't consider them at the time. I know what they are now.
Can I ask you to look at a guidance note, which is part of the industry guidance? In general terms, before I show it to you, were you aware that organisations within the construction industry produced guidance documents to enable compliance with the prevailing regulatory requirements?
Yes, I did, yeah.
Are you familiar with a body called the Building Control Alliance?
No.
So does it follow from that you weren't aware at the time that the Building Control Alliance produced guidance documents for the construction industry?
Yeah, I hadn't heard of them.
You hadn't heard of them, I see. So, might you have heard or did you hear of something called TGN 18, Technical Guidance Note 18, which was produced by the Building Control Alliance?
No.
Okay.
But I wouldn't expect, as a principal contractor, to be canvassed by that material. I would expect that to be at the forefront of information provided to RIBA organisations. We
discussed earlier CWCT, and you said you knew about the body.
Yes.
We discussed a little bit about the standard. Were you aware at the time that something existed called CWCT's Technical Note 73 from March 2011?
No, I wasn't, no.
It has the title Fire Performance of Curtain Walls and Rain Screens. Does that trigger a memory?
No.
No. Was there any system or process in place at Ryden at the time, 2013 to 16, for ensuring that Ryden's senior employees were familiar with specialist bodies such as the CWCT and the Building Control Alliance and their product, their guidance notes, so that industry guidance and expertise could inform Ryden's work?
No, and I wouldn't expect them to either.
Why is that?
The range of construction materials and specialists is enormous. So I don't think that's would be realistic for a principal contractor to digest that amount of information. That again points to the requirement to appoint experts to do this on behalf of the project and inform their design development to take cognizance of that.
So does it help me if I went into Rydon's operating headquarters in March 2014 and wanted to look at a guidance document? Would there be one on site? So I wanted to look at technical guidance note 18 produced by the Building Control Alliance. Would it be there, or would I?
Wouldn't necessarily be on site, but it would be electronically available.
Right.
Should you want to refer to it.
And was there a system within Ryden for disseminating guidance documents, such as those I've mentioned, Technical Guidance Note 18 or Technical Note 73, so that senior project professionals would be familiar with them?
No, and for the reasons that I just gave.
I'd like to turn to a different topic, and that's your relationship with Peter Madison. Now, in your witness statement, which is RYD 30942225, you say on page 3, if you look at it, at paragraph 2.5.1, business development. And you say, leading a business stream as director with responsibility for the strategic direction of the business, reviewing existing business plans and developing plans for the future on an annual basis. This is part of your job. And then you go on to say, in the last 3 lines there, as refurbishment director, I am an ambassador for Ryden. A key aspect of this is creating relationships with prospective clients and maintaining relationships with current ones. Was it common at the time that you won the project in the spring of 2014 for personal relationships to underpin the projects that Ryden worked on?
I think, as I put in my statement there, as a director of a business stream, I am an ambassador for the culture and for the business, and creating the relationships with the clients. So yeah, that's part of my role.
Yeah. Were there any individuals involved in the Grenfell Tower refurbishment, in any aspect of it, with whom you had a relationship before Ryden won the project?
There's 2 people. Peter, I think many years ago, worked for Hyde.
Is that Peter Madison?
Peter Madison.
Yes.
Yeah.
Worked for Hyde. Yes.
I didn't do a project with him as a client contracts manager, but I knew he was part of the Hyde organisation, and Sasha Jevons also worked for Hyde in the past, so I was aware of those individuals.
Did you know either of them personally before March 2014?
I'd met them, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
In what context had you met them?
There was an annual housing forum that is held in Brighton, and we do an invite for our clients and anyone interested to come along. So that was an occasion where I would have met them and been introduced to them.
Yes, before that, well, let me just can you put a date on that?
It was an annual event, so I would have seen them quite a few times.
I see. When was the first time, doing the best you can with your memory, that you met Peter Madison and Sasha Jevons?
Probably maybe around the millennium, but something like that. 2000?
Yeah. I see. And did you meet them regularly, either of them, between 2000 and 2013?
No.
No. What was the occasion on which you met them?
Well, the one that comes to mind is the housing forum, where the industry gathers, basically.
Right. Any other occasions you can recall?
There was another set of housing conferences in Manchester, where there'd be invites and you'd attend the same forums and functions.
Right. Had you had any dealings with him in the sense of working for him or alongside him on any project?
No.
I see. Was he a personal friend, Peter Madison?
I wouldn't say so, no.
Can I ask you to go to ART 406206, please? This is an email from Simon Cash of Artelia to Neil Reed, and it's from October 2015. We believe. It's sometimes difficult to work out whether US numbering or UK numbering is used, but it doesn't matter for this purpose. And it says, for your info, I had a good meeting with Peter Madison this afternoon, and we went through the various concerns regarding quality, program, costs, etc. He is conscious that his relationship with Steve goes back a long way, and Steve talks to him direct. However, Peter does not want that relationship to circumvent Artelia and bypass the role that we are playing in trying to get the project finished to the required quality and within budget. Peter fully appreciates what we're doing and is very supportive of our approach. That email is something we may need to come back later on. I just want to focus on where Mr. Cash says that that you are conscious, according to him, that his relationship with Steve goes back a long way and Steve talks to him direct. Is that a fair description of your relationship with Mr. Madison at that stage, late 2015, that it went back a long way?
Yeah, I think that's fair enough, yeah. I mean, Rydon's had and still do, have a long association of work with the Hyde organisation. And at a point in time in the past, Peter worked for Hyde.
Can you just explain a little bit about what Hyde at the time did?
They're an HA, housing association, so they were a provider of social housing, and we undertook some significant projects with them in terms of estate regeneration across a number of London boroughs.
Yeah. It says that you speak to him direct. Steve talks to him direct. Is that right? Did you speak to Peter Madison direct?
I would say very, very rare would I do that. And I entirely agree with the sentiment of the email. We were absolutely careful that the project is administered by Entail.
When you spoke to Peter Madison direct, did you make any written record of those conversations?
No.
Do you know for yourself whether Mr. Madison did?
No.
Do you know when that direct dialogue between the two of you began on this project?
It probably when I took the role of contracts manager.
Right. What about before?
I would have informed Peter that it was going, it was going to be me that took over the role of contracts manager, and that would be a polite conversation to Peter to give him confidence of our approach to the completion of the project.
Right.
Which goes back to the first sentence.
Now, you took the role of contracts manager on in October 2015 when Simon Lawrence left.
Yeah.
Were you speaking with Peter Madison direct at any time pre-tender?
No.
Can I ask you to look at a document, RYD 3086648, please? Now, this is an email dated the 6th of March 14, to Tim Shuttler, copy to Jeff Henton. Now, just look at the date, it's important. 6th of March 14, subject, read Grenfell Tower, tender clarifications, action required. Now, just before I go on to the text of it, who was Tim Shuttler?
He's our legal representative.
Right. Now, it says, Tim, at the housing conference, we had meetings with senior representatives from K&C, and my opinion is that in the event that we were the successful contractor, they would have no issue signing up to a form of documentation as we suggest. We are at compromise with the employer's agent because we requested this amendment subsequent to our tender submission. We have been informally advised that we are in pole position, ours to lose. You see that? Now, I'm going to come back to that topic a little bit later. I just want to focus here on the occasion, because you refer there to a housing conference. Was the housing conference that you're describing to Mr. Shuttler there the Chartered Institute of Housing conference that took place between the 4th and the 6th of March 2014?
Must have been, yes.
Now, we've obtained the list of attendees. I say we've obtained it. We've been prompted to look at it, and it's available in the public domain. Can we please have it available? It's available on the internet, https, and I'm not going to read out the full title of it, but if we could just have that up on the screen, please. Now, this is the attendee list of the annual Chartered Institute of Housing South East Regional Conference and Exhibition, 4th to 6th of March 2014. Is this the conference that Mr. Shuttler, that you are referring to in your email to Mr. Shuttler of the 6th of March?
Yes.
Right. Now, we've got the list of attendees. Can I ask you, please, to go to page 9, where you can see on that page the KCTMO attendees on the left-hand side, under K. Can you see?
Yes.
Kensington and Chelsea TMO Limited, Sasha Jevons, Executive Director of Operations, Robert Black, Chief Executive. And we can also see, and one can note in passing, a huge cast from Kingspan, including, at the bottom of the page, Mark Swift, the Cool Therm Project Manager. But then I want to look at page 13 with you. You can see that on that page we have Ryden Construction Limited, Mark Mitchener, and then Ryden Group, Steve Blake, that's you, Tim Edwards, Jeff Henton, Tim Rigby, Peter Robertson, Jonathan Rowland, and Andrew Sharp. So quite a few of you there. So when you are telling Mr. Shuttler that you had meetings with senior representatives from K&C, was that Sasha Jevons and Robert Black, who were the KCTMO attendees?
Yeah, not Robert Black.
Not Robert Black. Who were the senior representatives from K&C then, you're telling Mr. Shuttler you met at this conference?
It would either be Peter or Sasha.
Right. So, although Peter Madison does not appear to be a KCTMO attendee at this conference, you say he was there, was he?
He may have. There was a lot of peripheral events.
Right.
This was in the Brighton Conference Centre, but there was a lot of invites from various different organisations to functions that were held either side of the conference.
I see. Now, that takes me to the next point. You tell Mr. Shuttler in the first line of the email that we had meetings in the plural. Were these pre-arranged meetings? So, lunch, dinner, coffee, tea?
I don't think so. It's generally informal.
Did you?
So I'm not aware of making a meeting with those guys.
Right. Did you sit down for any meal or any tea or coffee or something like that?
Yeah, we may have done.
Right.
I can't remember.
Right. And do you remember who paid for the meals or the teas and coffees or drinks?
I can't, but I wouldn't. It wouldn't be unusual if we did.
It says, the email says, that we've been informally advised that we are in pole position, ours to lose. Who told you that?
I can't recall.
Was it at that housing conference that you were told that?
It must have been.
So would it be right, therefore, that by a process of elimination, it could only be Sasha Jevons or Peter Madison who did tell you that?
That must be the case, but I cannot recall.
Now, this was the day before the tender interviews that you were due to attend on the 7th of March. Do you remember that?
I didn't attend the interviews.
No, but just in terms of timing, can you confirm that this conference and this email took place, or dated the day before the tender conference, the tender interviews?
Okay.
Who did attend the tender interviews?
I think it was Alan Sharrock's, Simon Lawrence, and Nikki Donnelly.
Do you recall whether in your discussions when you were informally advised that you were in pole position, ours to lose, anything was said about the TMA's proposed value engineering?
No. Well, I don't recall, so...
Right. Was there any discussion in more general terms about savings or the budget?
No.
Now, I'm going to turn back a year in time to the spring of 2013, and I want to ask you some questions next about Ryden's early involvement in the Grenfell Tower project. Can I ask you, please, first to go to RYD 401097. This is an email from Robert Powell to you, Mr. Blake, on the 5th of April 2013. Mr. Powell was at Appleyards, as they were then called. They then later became called Artelia, as I think you know. Steve, good talking with you now. Perhaps you would have a look at the attached supporting information for the proposed redevelopment of Grenfell Tower R, B, K and C. If you would be prepared to venture a check price against this, it would help us, recognising that we need to agree a usable framework stroke means of procurement with R, B, K and C. Speak next week is what he says at the end. And you can see that he's forwarding things to you, including some attachments. And you can see there that the attachments comprise a set of plans and a schedule of works and a Stage D report, outline specification. You see that?
Yes.
Yeah. Just focusing on the next paragraph. We'll come back to the attachments in a moment. It says, as mentioned, we are talking to more than one contractor in consideration of such an appointment, and our client is looking to utilise their existing frameworks to procure same. Do you know why Mr. Powell had contacted you?
I didn't, no. I mean, for that purpose.
It refers to a conversation. Steve Good talking with you just now. Did Rob Powell ring you, or did you ring him? Do you remember?
He rang me.
He rang you. So was that a cold call? How did that conversation come about?
I don't know.
Right. Do you remember whether you were expecting a call from him?
I wasn't expecting a call from him, no.
Right. Had you had any prior contact with Mr. Powell on
No.
Grenfell Tower prior to receiving this, prior to that telephone conversation?
Yeah, I would have assumed that he'd perhaps looked at the previous jobs we'd done, or...
Right. You say you assumed that. Can you remember anything about the telephone conversation?
Only him describing whether or not we were able to give him a check price.
Right. Now, we looked a moment ago at the attachments. Did you read the supporting information Mr. Powell had sent you?
I would have opened it up to have a look at it, yeah.
Right. Would you have opened up, do you remember, the Grenfell Stage D report outline specification that's referred to there?
Probably.
Do you remember whether you responded to Mr. Powell?
I don't think I did, because I think that what he was asking for was basically doing his job for him, to establish a budget, and I think the level of complexity or the amount of different things going on in the job made it quite a difficult thing to do as a check price. It needed to be undertaken as a very considered cost exercise. So we didn't put in a check price for it.
Well, we'll come to that, but I think the answer to my question is no. Can I ask you to look at next, please, at RYD 401115. That's an email showing you forwarding Mr. Powell's email to Jeff Henton, Ryden's managing director, along with the attachments. And it's dated the same day, 5th of April 2013. And you say, Jeff, this is the Peter Madison scheme, which is right up our street. They are asking for a framework that we are one to procure to avoid OJEU. Andy, any thoughts? Could be a challenge, but a start. Now, there's nothing in the email you forward that you'd received from Mr. Powell which would indicate that Mr. Powell was seeking to avoid the OJEU procedure. And we can see that that's the case. Where had the information come from that when you say they are asking for a framework that we are one to procure to avoid OJEU?
I thought that was referenced on the previous email.
The reference in the email below it, and we can see it actually in the third
I can't see it on the
line, you're right, there's no reference to OJEU. What there is in the third paragraph is, in the second part of the sentence, recognising that we need to agree a usable framework / means of procurement with RBKC. That's the only reference or potential reference to procurement that we have there. And my question, I'll ask it again, given what is said and is not said in that email, where did you get the idea, as you're telling Mr. Henton, that they are asking for a framework that we are one to procure to avoid OJEU?
If you tender through a framework, you don't need to go through an OJEU process.
Where did you get the idea that the intention was to avoid OJEU as a goal?
By him saying that we need to agree a usable framework.
I see. Now, you refer...
Doesn't make any difference to us.
I'm so sorry.
I'm not sure I understand this reference to an existing framework. Could you just explain?
If various organisations have frameworks that that you apply to be part of, and as such, then you can procure work through that framework, through the agreed sort of supply list, that a client doesn't have to go through an OJEU process, which is basically an open notice. It's a European regulation.
All right, thank you.
Did you get the idea from Mr. Powell that he, or at least his client, wanted to avoid an OJEU process?
By reference to a framework, that seemed to be their preferred route. From a contractor's point of view, it makes no difference to us at all.
Now, you refer to the Peter Madison scheme. This is the Peter Madison scheme, which is right up our street. Had you already been told about this project by Peter Madison?
Or Jeff may have been. I don't know.
What did you mean by the Peter Madison scheme?
That it was a scheme that a client was had on their books to do in the future.
Well, the Peter Madison scheme, to the uninitiated, this email suggests that you knew that Peter Madison was behind the project, and Jeff Henton also knew that. Is that right?
Yeah, and that would be part of the role of saying to people, what work do you have coming up in the future, so that we can alert our business development team, because OJEUs are what they are, they have to be advertised. So if we can put the up and coming schemes together with notices, then that means that we don't miss the opportunity as and when they arise.
How did you know at this stage, and it's April 13, that Mr. Madison was involved?
That either Peter would have told me or Jeff told me.
Either Peter would have told me. Is that Peter Madison?
Yes.
Right. So do you remember having a discussion or conversation with Peter Madison, even at this stage, April 13, about this project?
I don't remember, and it could be any number of schemes with any number of clients. My role to say, what have you got coming up in the future?
You told us earlier this morning, and just for our reference, it's page 90 at line 10, that you had no contact with Peter Madison before the tender. You're now, I think, telling us that Peter Madison might have been the one to discuss this project with you at this stage, which is a year or so, or 9 months before the tender.
Yeah.
Can we be clear about your evidence, Mr. Blake?
Yeah. I was in answering your question. I was referring to the tender. We may have had an exchange about other bits of work, but if it was specific to the tender, we didn't have any dialogue about that.
Right. Well, just to be clear,
And I would see that as both people being totally appropriate as well.
did you have any discussions with Peter Madison before or in early April 2013 about the Grenfell Tower regeneration project?
I may have done, and it would have been only to be informed that they're planning to do some upgrading works to that particular project. And as such, that would be of interest to me because I'd be interested in doing the work. So then, like I say, I'd alert the team to the fact that there is a prospective tender opportunity coming out in the future.
Yes. My question is directed to Peter Madison himself rather than the TMO as client in general. I'll just have one more go. Did you have any discussions with Peter Madison himself about this regeneration project in or before early April 2013, Mr. Blake?
I don't recall specifically, and if I had, it would have been just for him to inform me that there's a tender opportunity in the future.
Did Mr. Madison tell you at this time that he wanted Ryden to take on the role as contractor for these works?
No, he didn't.
What was the nature of what he told you? Can you remember?
As I say, purely informative.
Right. Can you explain why you've not mentioned this early contact with Mr. Madison in your witness statement?
I didn't see any need to.
Can we look at the statement? It's paragraph 4.1 on page 6, RYD 3094225. Page 6, please. Paragraph 4.1. You say there, I first became aware of the Grenfell Tower project in April 2013 when Robert Powell of Appleyards, part of Artelia, asked if Ryden would prepare a check price for the project. Having looked at the email about the Peter Madison scheme we've been talking about, do you accept that that's not entirely accurate?
Well, I think in the context of that statement, it's saying that that's aware of it as a reality. Someone's rung us up and said, would we give them a price? So that seems reasonable to say that.
Did you regard your role at the time as simply performing a market check? In other words, just providing a market price as a benchmark?
Against that? So I don't understand what you mean.
Well, you say in your statement that you were asked to provide a check price for the project.
Yeah.
Does that mean bid for it, or does that just mean provide an indicative
No,
number?
that's budget information.
I see. Now let's look at one of the attachments to Mr. Powell's email, which you told us, I think you opened, RYD 401103. And it's page 6 I'd like to look at with you, please. And the items listed in the middle column under existing residential flats. Can you see that there? Levels 1 to 20.
Yes.
External envelope. And I should have said this is the outline specification. And it says there, if you look down, the third entry down is P10, sundry insulation stroke proofing work, existing columns overcladding, Celotex FR5000. You see that?
Yes.
And then underneath that, H92 rain screen cladding, existing columns overcladding, VMZ composite zinc panels. And then in the right-hand column, H72, I think you have to go.
Yeah, I've got it.
You've got it, up a bit. H72, aluminium strip, sheet coverings, flashings. You see that? Existing columns overcladding, C drawing, and then PPC aluminium flashings. And then H92, rain screen cladding, external wall, 12 millimeters HPL cladding, Trespa or similar, and subframe system, secret fix. Is it clear, or was it clear to you at the time, that this project involved the overcladding of an existing high-rise residential building?
Yes, it was, yeah.
And we know, as you've told us, that Ryden had experience of that kind of project, Chalcots and Ferrier Point. Is that why you said in your email to Jeff Henter that the project was, quotes, right up our street, quotes?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
Yes. Can we just go back to that email again? RYD 401115. You say, just before signing off, could be a challenge, but a start. What did you mean there by could be a challenge? What was a challenge about this project?
If they choose a framework that we're not part of, then we don't get to tender it. So that's the end of that.
I see. So this is nothing to do, just to be clear, nothing to do with the building, the fact that it was an occupied refurbishment.
That wasn't a reference to the building.
I follow. Can I ask you to look at RYD 401154? This is an email of the 5th of April 2015, so same day, from Vicky Croft, who's a senior bid manager at Ryden. Project profiles as requested, only frameworks that were on SEC, HCA and City West. And we'll come back to that. It looks as if you're asking for project profiles, and you can see from the attachments that she attaches Ashmole, Ferrier Point and the Chalcots and St George's Estate. Did you ask for those?
Yes.
Why? Why was that?
I wanted to see what frameworks we were on.
I see. But why did you
They're
pick
quite
these?
a fluid, again, point in time. They expire. They're not being used. We're in the middle of applying for them. So, yeah, I was just seeing as a business where we're at.
Did you ask for those project profiles because certainly Ferrier Point and the Chalcots were high rises?
Yes.
Can I ask you to go to RYD 401203? Now, these are emails in early April 2013, so about this time. There's a string of them, and I'd like to go to page 4 and 3, if we can have those up together, please. Pages 4 and 3, because we're going low down in the email string. And if you go to page 4, you can see we've seen the email from Robert Powell, and in fact we now see you coming back to him. So I think I'm answering a question I asked you earlier. As promised, this is bottom of page 3, I have attached some case studies of previous tower blocks projects we've carried out. I've asked Andy Sharp, our Business Development Director, to make contact with you regarding procurement opportunities. In addition, I've copied in Alan Sharrocks, who as contracts manager knows a lot more about tower blocks than I do, and our managing surveyor, Zach Maynard, who will be able to provide budget advice. You see that?
Yep.
There's no request from Mr. Powell for case studies that we saw in his first email. So can I ask this question? When did you promise to provide case studies to him?
If it was part of that original telephone exchange.
I follow. Now, in the email on page 3, 9th of April, you say in the second line, and I've read it to you, that you asked Andy Sharp to make contact regarding procurement opportunities. What did you mean by procurement opportunities?
How the client intended to procure the contract.
And what did you envisage that Mr. Sharrocks and Mr. Maynard would provide by way of advice?
If they were able to provide budget advice, I got them involved with doing that on behalf of us.
Mr. Chairman, I'm in the middle of this email string. It's probably better if I can finish it off, but it won't take more than a couple of minutes.
Yes, all right, we'll carry on.
If I may, thank you. Now, can you look at to page 2 and 3, and look at the top of page 3. He says there, and this is Robert Powell. Back to you, Steve. Many thanks. I'm having a Grenfell Tower day tomorrow with our team in London. Is there any chance we might get some costs feedback against the schedule and drawings I sent you to discuss at our meeting? Perhaps let me know when we could expect same if tomorrow is too big an ask. And then if you look at the bottom of page 2, your response says it is too soon for tomorrow, but would be happy to meet to understand scope of works and budget. And then at the top of page 2, Mr. Powell responds, and this is also the 9th of April, Steve, to be honest, until I've sat down with my team tomorrow, I'm in the dark as much as you. Happy to have a phone conversation with whoever needs to know from your perspective in the hope we can get some quick and dirty costings on the info I have sent you. What did you understand he meant by quick and dirty costings?
Well, very high level costings. So without much detail or interrogation. So
And if we look
we weren't able to do that. So, and I wasn't prepared to do that.
I see. Okay. If we look at the bottom of page 1 of this email chain, you can see that you put him in touch with Alan Sharricks and Zach Maynard, and you say, we will help as much as we can. See that?
Yeah.
What help did you anticipate Ryden would provide?
He was asking for some, like I say, this quick and dirty costings that, in my mind, were meaningless. But I didn't want to, upset him with such a negative response. So I offered the help of Alan and Zach, should he wish to talk to them about part of the project, because that part of it is to provide a budget price on behalf of the client is his role, and we weren't able to provide that service for him.
Right. Why was Ryden prepared to help?
Just to maintain a relationship, because obviously it's a job that we were interested in doing.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I feel myself slightly stranded in the middle of an email chain, which will probably take longer than another couple of minutes at least. It's not.
Would it be wiser to call a halt there?
I think we might as well, if that's all right.
Right.
But I will come back to this email chain after the break.
All right, thank you. Well, Mr. Blake, we're going to have a break now so we can all get some lunch. Please remember not to talk about your evidence or anything else to do with the refurbishment while you're out of the room. And we'll resume at 2:05, please.
Okay.
Would you like to give the usher, please? Thank you. Thank you. 2:05.